All right, y'all, well, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Jackson. I love talking music, and I especially love talking music with you guys. And every week, I do a roundup of all of the new albums that I listened to in the previous week, and I discuss them, give them a score, and just talk about how I felt about them. So we're doing that again today. I've got 8 fresh, mostly fresh albums and EPs that I listened to and that we're going to discuss. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Don't want to waste any time. We are kicking things off with the latest EP from ivri. Hope that's how you pronounce that. I believe it's ivri, but that is Evidence of You. So this was an EP, like I mentioned, and I really enjoyed it. Every time that I think I am kind of over this hyperpop thing, an artist comes out and does something like this. And don't get me wrong, this isn't exactly a hyper pop record, but it does incorporate a lot of those elements in the music, and it does so in some really, really fun ways. It combines those elements of hyper pop with things like alt rock, punk, and other like heavy rock conventions, and altogether it was really enjoyable and really surprisingly seamless. I wouldn't have guessed that the sounds that they were kind of meshing together would have meshed together the way that they did. Those elements mostly did fade away after the first half of the short listen though, and they were the highlight of the EP for me, so it was kind of disappointing to hear them fade away and phase out. But even still, the latter half, the punk sounds were great, they were solid, and it was very clearly inspired by alternative music of the 2000s, and it really used those inspirations in a really strong, non-derivative sort of way. It was a solid listen. I wish it had been longer. I wish more of those hyperpop elements were incorporated there. But altogether, I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give this one a 7.1 out of 10. A really strong, solid display here. Eager to see what they put out next, truly. Next up was a very different sort of record, and that was MARSHMALLOW by Dobby. Now, truth be told, I'm not totally sure how I happened upon this record. Something recommended it to me. It was probably Spotify, but something somewhere recommended me this record, or at the very least told me it was coming out, and so I saved it. I do that a lot. If I see new records coming out, I just go ahead and save them because I want to listen to as much as I can. In this case, though, whatever it was that recommended me this, I really wish it hadn't. In the just under an hour it takes to listen to this record, I was pretty much ready for it to end after the first minute. And that's not an exaggeration. That's not me trying to be funny. That's the truth. It was tough. Let's talk about why. So for starters, Dobby's voice just is not suited for the rap music that he is attempting to do, at least not if he wants it to be effective. And that's tough because there are a lot of unique voices in rap, and some of them are different and take some getting used to, but I feel like the voice that he puts on when he's rapping just does not work, if that makes any sense. It's whiny, it's kind of shrill, and again, for the type of rap that he's trying to tackle with this album, it feels completely out of place. It doesn't work at all. It's kind of weird. Now, to take things even further here, the bars and lyrics that Dobby was rapping were just not remotely effective either. In fact, they were so repetitive that it bothered me to absolutely no end. He is constantly rhyming words with the same word on this album. Like, it happens constantly. If you listen for it, you'll notice it's so frequent. And sometimes he doesn't even do that. He just repeats what he just said over and over and over again. He just repeats the same phrase or word over and over and over again. And it's obnoxious. It happens so much. Now, taking an even deeper dive into the lyricism here, it's clear that he really doesn't trust the audience to understand what he means when there's any sort of nuance. And that's on all fronts here. All nuance or abstraction, it's almost immediately explained by him, no matter how obvious he makes it in the first place. And that's exhausting because most people don't need these sort of things explained to them. If you're halfway listening, which most people are if they're listening to it anyways, it doesn't make any sense. And then on top of this, there are so many bars that serve no purpose other than to give exposition as to what he previously said or what was previously heard. And speaking on what was previously heard, the album is just riddled with these cinematic scenes and pieces that are just really ineffective, honestly. And as a sort of concept album, which this is, that's what he's described it as, these conceptual moments just don't work. They really don't. He's time traveling and talking to his past self. And even if you take away the parts where he then explains to us what just happened in these conceptual moments, like we're 5 years old and have no clue what he could possibly be talking about, it's not done well. And truth be told, I've rarely heard something that is attempted to be done like it is here pulled off well. And yet, we are about as far from this being pulled off well as I have ever heard. It would have been tough to do this right. We were far from that. Those cinematic conceptual moments that are the story behind the album end up feeling just really corny and really cringy, and that's definitely not what Dobby was intending or anticipating here. And then on top of all of this, there's this complete forcing of emotional ideas and themes onto us. You can really tell that Dobby wants this album to emotionally resonate and really deeply impact his audience. You can tell he really, really wants that. And that strong desire ends up leading all of these emotional moments to just fall completely flat. They feel so forced in the worst sort of way. And also, many of those themes and emotional ideas that he's trying to force onto you, they're really repetitive. They get reused over and over and over again in the album, which is weird. I mean, it's like a 15-minute album and the same themes keep coming up over and over and over again. They wear really thin, really quickly. It's really a shame. At the end of the day, I think it's really clear that Dobby wants to be, or at the very least he wants to emulate Eminem. That seems to be a really clear inspiration for him. But he's about as far from there as we can get. I think he's far from any sort of decent mark here as a whole, and I just really don't know what all to make of this. At best, he maybe has a bit of talent as a producer, but that's about all I can give him here. So my score for this record, my score for MARSHMALLOW is a 1.0 out of 10. Tough score. Not my lowest score ever, not my lowest score on this channel, but one of them for sure. Next up was a very different album with a different vibe in a lot of ways, and that is A Stranger to You by Loathe. Now this one was actually recommended to me, and so I moved it to the top of my list as far as what I wanted to listen to. Now, if you know me, or if you've been around any of my content for any amount of time, then you probably know that I really have an extreme distaste for metal. That's probably an understatement. I really don't like it. I just can't. I try every year to get into metal. I try to listen to the best metal albums of the year. I did it last year. I'm doing it this year. Hasn't worked out for me. But with that said, I had the recommendation, so I decided to listen to this one, and I'm actually really glad I did. I'm glad I stuck with it. There are obviously those heavy metal aspects. There's death metal aspects and shrieking vocals here and there. And those weren't a surprise. I assumed that that was what I was getting into. And also, with no surprise, it was too much for me. I didn't enjoy those aspects. But on the other hand, there's actually a really nice indie rock and sort of shoegaze sound that is curated really, really well here. It works really well despite the genre that Loathe usually plays in. And with that said, the metal moments here, the moments that I didn't really like, don't overshadow the record as a whole. It's kind of interesting. There was actually a lot for me to enjoy here. I think it was made exceptionally well, and pretty much every non-metal aspect that was working in this record worked for me in a really strong way. So I'm really glad I gave it a shot. If you enjoy metal, if you enjoy indie rock, if you enjoy those two things, I could easily see this album being like the album of the year for you. if you just enjoy one of those two things like me, give it a shot anyways. I think you might really end up enjoying this album. So at the end of the day, my score for this one is a 6.6 out of 10. Obviously, I just don't vibe with those metal parts, but a really solid listen, very surprisingly. Next up, my next listen was Lovesweet by girlsweetvoiced. Look, I'm a sucker for albums that sound like this. When you've got these smooth pop vocals, which the vocals are practically perfect on this album, paired with perfectly stripped down, quaint electric production, it's one of my favorite things. I think I could have listened to this album all day, whether I was listening intently, whether I had it on in the background, or somewhere in between those two. I could have listened to this album all day. It could have fit any sort of mold I wanted it to, which is really neat. In a lot of ways, it felt really inspired by early 2000s vocal pop, especially when it came to her vocals. They had that feel, and some of her production choices, but most of her production choices are really notably modern. So it blends, those early 2000 sounds with those modern indie sounds really seamlessly. It's actually kind of impressive. It was both nostalgic and modern at the same time, and that was super cool. I do think the sound maybe got a tad repetitive, but as someone who really enjoyed those sounds, who really enjoyed those sonic themes, it didn't really matter to me one bit. If you didn't enjoy that as much as I did, I could see you not enjoying this album as much, but I loved it. It was far from groundbreaking, just like many albums I listened to, but again, it didn't need to be. It was everything it wanted to be, nothing more, nothing less. It was just a really easy listen, made really, really well. I mean, really well. So this album, to me, gets an 8.0 out of 10, an 8 out of 10. Solid listen, seriously. If you like vocal pop, if you like easy listening, give it a listen. Next up was a very different album, and that was Cannonball by Man/Woman/Chainsaw. Now, when I came away from listening to this record for the first time, the one thought that dominated all of my others was that the scope of this album was just way too big. It really just was, unfortunately. The band here is almost literally trying a different genre, or at the very least trying a wildly different style of a certain genre on every last song on this record. You've got indie folk, you've got alt rock, you've got hard rock, you've got stripped down vocal pop, you've got psychedelic rock, you've got indie punk, you've got stripped down indie folk. There's so much to take in here, and none of it is done particularly well, unfortunately. At most, I enjoyed one or two songs, but even then, I wouldn't say they were done exceptionally well. They were average at best. Everything about every single track felt so generic and stock. It was like a shell of what its inspiration was. And that's the problem with most albums like this. Sure, artists and bands have pulled off albums with even bigger scopes than this. Every time I talk about an album like this, I mention the White Album, every single time. And yes, the White Album exists, and it's fantastic. But most people aren't the Beatles. And even if they make good music, which, to be fair, I don't know much about Man, Woman, Chainsaw outside of this listen, most artists are not the Beatles. Most artists don't have the technical skill and ability to just pick up other genres and instruments like the Beatles did at the time. It's hard to do something like this, and I think bands and artists really underestimate that. I think they underestimate how hard this really is, especially when you have a record like this and the energy and atmosphere change so drastically from song to song to song to song. As a listener, it's hard to get your footing. Now, that isn't to say that energy and atmosphere can't change on an album, but as a full cohesive work, there needs to be some sort of consistency here, right? The Beatles, the White Album, it did not have much consistency, but you know what was consistent? The production and the quality of each track, just about. I mean, throw Wild Honey Pie out, but seriously, they were trying a lot, and it was consistently good. Here, the only consistency was the genericness of each track. The production was average, the vocals were sometimes okay, sometimes totally grating. The guitar is fine, but sometimes it doesn't even show up. or at least not in the same way as it did on the tracks where it's okay. At the end of the day, they just did not hit the mark on what they were trying to do, and it was pretty far from it. Again, albums with this big of a scope, they're hard to pull off. My score here ends up being a 3.3 out of 10 for the band. This was my first encounter with them. I'll still be listening to stuff they put out in the future. I'm rooting for them. They need more direction. They need more direction than what they had here. Next up was Nowhere, the latest EP by Venturing, which is Jane Remover's side project. Now look, this is an 8-minute EP, okay? It was only 8 minutes long. Maybe my standards are a little high, but I would expect a lot out of an 8-minute listen. And unfortunately, I just didn't get much of anything here, aside from an atmosphere that was crafted relatively fine and a sample that I actually did appreciate in Drunk Lullaby. Even though it wasn't that effective of a sample, I just kind of enjoyed recognizing it and hearing it. Now look, with that said, I'll be the first to admit I've never really been on the Jane Remover hype train. I've tried many times to get on it. I've tried to vibe with it. It's just not up my alley. It should be. It should be. Jane Remover's music should be something I enjoy. It isn't, unfortunately. And now this EP is closer to something I would enjoy. It's closer to something that should have been up my alley, and it just wasn't. It was boring and slow, and really it just didn't do a lot to convince me that it needed to exist or that I needed to use 8 minutes of my life to even listen to it. Like I already mentioned, the one saving grace here is how atmospheric it is, and I can vibe with that. But even then, it wasn't any sort of thing that I hadn't heard many times before in the genre. I think it's fair to expect more here in just about every way. So my score for this one is a 4.4 out of 10. Just not big on the Jane Remover train. I wish I got it, like many of y'all do. My next listen was Shark by Javier Reyes. Now look, this is a guy who has been a part of an extremely large number of projects and albums and bands that I love, listen to frequently, and still listen to today. He's been a part of a ton of records that are sitting here behind me. This is actually the first time I have listened to a solo work of his, and I'm actually really glad I did. I wish I had known about this sooner, and I wish I'd listened to more of his solo stuff sooner. I'm going to get into it now because this was a solid listen. The sound of this album is two things. It's perfectly defined, and it is extremely enjoyable for me. It's an easy listening electronic indie album, and it really works as that sort of record in a really, really strong way. It really only deviates from its sound on one track, and that track is Black Hole, which feels more acoustic and country inspired. And admittedly, I do think that is the weakest of the 10 tracks on this album, but even still, including Black Hole, I wouldn't say that there's a single bad track here. I think the sound can get a little overdone, but again, just like with one of the past records I mentioned, as someone who enjoys this sound, it never really caused me to lose any sort of interest. I think the novelty of it, the novelty of the electronic, easy listening indie kind of wore off towards the end, but my enjoyment of it didn't wear off. So this is an album I could really see myself spinning frequently. I'll be coming back to it soon. I have been going back to it since I listened. So it's a solid album. If you're into electronic music, give it a listen. My score here is a 7.4 out of 10. A really, really strong solo outing here. Next up, and the last album that I listened to last week was Question, From Where Do Our Primal Instincts Originate? Answer, MTV by Portraits of Tracy. This was a crazy listen. There was a lot at play here sonically, and believe it or not, almost all of it works exceptionally well. You've got hard rocking, high energy punk that is seemingly inspired by the likes of the Ramones. You've got 90s inspired, heavily produced electronic pop, pure rock and roll, and even 80s inspired synth pop. I mean, there was a lot packed into this 20-minute EP, and to only add to the impressive nature of this record, it was perfectly tight. Not a single moment was wasted, and aside from Royal Court's Great Misfortune, I think it was done almost perfectly. Even Royal Courts was a solid listen. It just does not stand out at all to me compared to the rest of the songs on this album, on this EP. I came away pretty amazed here. I still am. I feel like I've talked a lot recently about albums that are doing too much, too poorly from a sound standpoint, just like the Man Woman Chainsaw record we just talked about. And this one could easily have fallen into the same category as those, but instead it works. It checks almost every single box. The different sounds, the different genres are all done exceptionally well, and they're also really connected in ways that might not be super apparent upon a first glance. Those connections, like, for example, the energy she brings, her vocals, her productions, her themes, they make the transitions between these sounds and songs even easier and honestly way more enjoyable. It could have been super rigid, it could have been super poorly done and super hard to listen to, but it wasn't. It was insane. If you're into pop or rock at all, those are big categories, I would encourage you to give this one a listen. It's pretty insane. My score here is an 8.2 out of 10. I was very pleased with it. Go give it a listen, seriously. If you're into music, go give this one a listen. I could see most people scoring this a lot higher than I did, in all honesty. And maybe my score will go up here in the future. All right, well, that wraps up my week of listening. As always, let me know what you think of these albums, but more importantly, if there's an album that you want to see me review, if there's an album from 2026 that you want to see me listen to and give my take on and my score, please let me know in the comments. If you give me a recommendation, it's moving to the top of my list. Just most people don't give me recommendations on YouTube. So give me some recommendations. I want to listen to what you're loving. And let me know what you thought of these albums that I have listened to as well. All right. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss my next video. And we will see you next week at some point when I talk about all of the albums that I've listened to this week. There have been some big ones, including Phoebe Bridgers' latest album, a lot that I'm excited to talk about. So come back next time and we will get into some fun albums. Thanks for watching. I will see you then.